Why did you leave me? What am I supposed to do without you both? It should have been me,
Daniel whispered, kneeling by the grave, his voice breaking. He didn't know that moments later, fate would answer him, not with words, but with a crying baby abandoned beside trash, and nothing in his life would ever be the same. From the outside, Daniel Okoye's mansion stood like a monument to success. Tall iron gates, white stone walls, perfectly trimmed hedges that never missed a season. Everything about the place whispered wealth, order, and control. Inside lived one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. Daniel Okoye was once a man who never lost. In business, his name carried weight. Deals closed the moment he entered a room. But his greatest confidence was never in boardrooms. It was at home. Before the accident, the mansion was alive. His wife's laughter filled the halls. His daughter ran barefoot across polished floors, turning silence into joy. Daniel was powerful, but more than that, he was present. The night everything changed began like any other. Rain tapped softly against the car windows as they drove home, laughing about something small, something ordinary. Then came the crash. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The world folded in on itself. Daniel survived. His wife did not. Neither did his daughter. When he woke in the hospital, a doctor told him he would never walk again. The damage to his spine was permanent. The words meant nothing. Compared to what he had lost, they were weightless, because the real paralysis had already settled somewhere deeper. In his chest. Months passed. Daniel withdrew from the world like a man slowly sinking underwater. He stopped attending meetings, stopped answering calls. Friends came at first, well-dressed men with awkward condolences and rehearsed encouragement. But eventually, even they stopped knocking. He refused to shave. The beard grew thick and uneven, hiding a face that no longer recognized itself. The wheelchair became his shadow. It followed him through the mansion from morning to night, rolling over marble floors that once echoed with joy, and now returned only silence. Room after room, memory after memory. There was nowhere it didn't take him. Every morning his driver waited by the door. Every afternoon files piled up on his desk, contracts unsigned, decisions postponed. Every evening meals were served and cleared away untouched. But it was the nights that hurt the most. When the lights were off and the world finally went quiet, Daniel wheeled himself into the room where time had stopped. Framed photographs still lined the walls. His wife's smile, frozen in joy. His daughter's bright eyes, forever waiting. He never moved them. He needed to see their faces every day. Needed the pain to remind him that he had survived when they had not. Some nights he lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to his own breathing, and wondering why death had passed him by, why it had taken the wrong people. Surviving no longer felt like mercy. It felt like a sentence. One he was forced to live out, one empty night at a time. On the anniversary of the accident, Daniel did something he hadn't done in months. He asked his driver to take him out. "To the cemetery," he said quietly. The driver nodded without asking questions. As the car moved through the city, Daniel stared out the window, watching life continue without him. Children laughed on sidewalks. Couples argued by the roadside. Vendors shouted prices. Life was loud, busy, unapologetic. The world had not stopped when his did. When they arrived, the driver stepped away, giving him space. Daniel wheeled himself forward toward the two graves resting side by side. One small, one tall. His hands trembled as his eyes found the names carved into stone. His wife, his daughter. Daniel's chest tightened. Then he broke. He sat before the graves long after the driver disappeared from view. His fingers traced the cold letters again and again, as if touching them might undo what they represented. "I did everything right," he whispered. His voice cracked under the weight of the words. "I protected you. I loved you. I worked hard. I built a future." Tears slid down his unshaven face, soaking into his beard. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't care who saw. "Why did you leave me?" he asked the empty air. His hands curled into fists. "Why am I the one left behind?" There was no answer, only the wind moving through the trees. Daniel bowed his head and wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of sobs that come from a place too deep for sound. The kind that bend your spine, even when it's already broken. When the tears finally stopped, exhaustion took their place. He remained there, hollow and unmoving, until the sun began to sink low in the sky. Finally, Daniel turned his wheelchair back toward the car. The drive home was quiet. No music. No conversation. Only the soft hum of the engine and the weight of everything he had left behind at the cemetery. As they passed through a less traveled road near the edge of the city, Daniel's eyes caught movement near a row of overflowing trash cans. Something small, something wrapped in cloth. He frowned. "Stop the car," he said. The driver slowed, hesitating. "Sir, this area." "I said stop the car now." The sharpness in Daniel's voice startled them both. The car came to a halt. Daniel leaned forward in his seat, his heart pounding for a reason he didn't yet understand. "Help me down," he said. The driver opened the door and assisted him. Daniel wheeled closer, his eyes fixed on the trash container. Then he heard it. A weak cry, soft, thin, desperate. Daniel froze. He reached down and pulled aside a dirty blanket. His breath caught. A baby. Tiny. Shivering. Crying. Abandoned. Daniel stared at her, something inside him cracking open for the first time in years. "Who would leave you here?" he whispered. The baby cried harder, her tiny body trembling. Without thinking, Daniel reached out, and the moment his fingers touched her skin, everything changed. Daniel Okoye had made billion-dollar decisions without hesitation. But this terrified him. He looked around. No one. Just the distant hum of traffic and the baby's cries cutting through the air. The driver stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, maybe we should call the police or social services. This place isn't safe." Daniel didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the baby. Something about her felt unbearably wrong and impossibly right at the same time. The sight of her there, discarded beside trash, crying into an empty world, cut through his grief in a way nothing else had since the accident. "Help me," Daniel said quietly. The driver hesitated only a second before carefully lifting the baby and placing her into Daniel's waiting arms. The moment Daniel held her, something strange happened. The crying stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. It stopped completely. The baby's body relaxed against his chest, her breathing evening out as though she had finally found what she'd been looking for. One tiny hand reached upward, fingers curling around Daniel's own. She held him. Daniel's breath caught. He had held his daughter like this once. Years ago, late at night, when she had cried with fever and refused to sleep unless she was pressed against his heartbeat. The memory hit him so suddenly that his vision blurred. "It's okay," he whispered without thinking. "I've got you." The baby blinked up at him, her dark eyes wide and curious. She made a small sound, not a cry this time, but something softer, almost content. The driver shifted uneasily. "Sir, we still need to decide what to do." Daniel nodded slowly, but his eyes never left the baby's face. "We'll take her home," he said. The driver's head snapped up. "Home, for now," Daniel replied. His voice was steady in a way it hadn't been in months. "She can't stay here." The drive back felt different. Daniel sat quietly, the baby sleeping against his chest, her tiny fingers still wrapped around his hand. He didn't think about consequences. He didn't think about explanations. He only knew one thing. Putting her down felt impossible. When they reached the mansion, the staff froze in confusion at the sight of Daniel entering, with a baby in his arms. Questions hovered in the air, but none were spoken. "Call a nanny," Daniel instructed, "and a doctor." The examination happened in the sitting room, under bright lights and hushed voices. The doctor was thorough, checking reflexes, listening to her chest, measuring her weight. "She's healthy," he finally said, "but underweight. She hasn't been feeding well." There were no hospital tags, no birth records, no missing person alerts yet. Just another child who had arrived in the world quietly, and been left behind just as quietly. That night, Daniel listened from his wheelchair as the nanny moved back and forth across the room, rocking the baby, humming old lullabies, trying warm milk, gentle pats, whispered prayers. Sometimes the crying softened. Other times it stretched on, thin and relentless. Long past midnight, Daniel told himself it wasn't his concern. This was temporary. Just until the authorities sorted things out. Just until she was safe. He had done what was right. Brought the baby somewhere safe. That was enough. It had to be. He returned to his routine of silence, staying in his study, answering no calls, avoiding the nursery except when necessary. Still, the crying reached him. One night it went on too long. The sound slipped under the door of his room and refused to leave. Daniel tried to ignore it. He turned his chair away from the hallway, clenched his jaw, closed his eyes. It didn't stop. Minutes passed, then more. Something inside him tightened. Against his better judgment, Daniel pushed his wheelchair toward the sound. The movement felt heavier than usual, as though the house itself was resisting him. When he reached the nursery, he paused at the doorway. The nanny wasn't there. The baby lay in the crib, her small face red with distress, her cries breaking into hiccups. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. He rolled closer. The moment he reached out and lifted her, everything changed. She went quiet. Her body relaxed instantly, as if someone had turned off a switch. She pressed her face into his chest and let out a long, shaky breath. One tiny hand reached up and wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. Daniel froze. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He felt it then. A warmth spreading slowly through his chest. Not relief, not happiness. Connection. I'm here. He whispered, unsure why the words came so easily. I'm not going anywhere. The baby shifted, settling more comfortably against him, her grip tightening slightly as if she believed him. That became the pattern. Whenever she cried too long, Daniel came. He didn't announce it, didn't explain. He simply showed up, and every time, without fail, she calmed in his arms. Sometimes she slept. Sometimes she just held on to him, alert and quiet, studying his face as though memorizing it. The staff noticed. She only settles with him, the nanny said once, bewildered. Daniel said nothing, but inside something had begun to shift. The house no longer felt entirely empty. It breathed again, softly, cautiously, like a place that wasn't ready to hope, but wasn't completely dead either. And Daniel Okoye, a man who had survived when he didn't want to, began to feel, slowly, painfully, that perhaps survival had not been a mistake after all. Daniel did not tell anyone when he started coming to the nursery on his own. At first, it was only when the crying lasted too long. Then it became earlier, before the cries turned desperate. Eventually, he found himself there even when the baby was quiet, sitting beside the crib, watching her sleep. He told himself it was temporary, just until things settled, just until arrangements were made. But days passed and Daniel kept returning. He learned her rhythms without realizing it. The way her brows furrowed just before she woke. The small sound she made when she was hungry. The way her fingers curled instinctively around his when she sensed him near. He hadn't planned to notice these things. They happened anyway. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the curtains, Daniel found himself smiling at something small. The baby sneezed, then looked offended by it. The smile surprised him. It didn't last long, but it was there. Real. Unforced. When he realized what he'd done, the smile faded, replaced by guilt. How could he feel this when his wife and daughter were gone? That night, sleep refused to come. Daniel wheeled himself into the nursery and sat there in the dim light, listening to the baby's soft breathing. The room smelled faintly of milk and clean linen. Nothing like the cold, echoing silence of the rest of the house. You shouldn't need me, he murmured. I don't even know how to be this. The baby stirred, then reached out blindly until her fingers brushed his sleeve. She relaxed instantly. Daniel swallowed hard. In the days that followed, the staff noticed changes they didn't dare comment on. Daniel began leaving his room earlier. He asked questions about feeding schedules. He requested the baby be brought into the garden in the mornings. He even shaved. Not neatly. Not completely. Just enough to reveal the face beneath. The man who had once laughed easily, who had loved deeply. Friends tried calling again. Daniel didn't answer. Not yet. Something fragile was forming, and he wasn't ready to explain it to the world. He was barely ready to admit it to himself. One evening, while holding the baby close, Daniel realized something that made his chest ache in a different way. She didn't look at him with pity. She didn't see a crippled man in a wheelchair. She didn't know he was broken, or rich, or grieving. She only knew this. When she cried, he came. And for the first time since the accident, Daniel Okoye felt needed. Not admired, not respected. Needed. The realization frightened him more than loneliness ever had, because it meant this child wasn't just passing through his life. She was anchoring herself there, and part of him, quiet, terrified, and aching, was already anchoring back. The question of her name lingered longer than Daniel expected. At first, everyone avoided it. The doctor wrote female infant on the file. The nanny called her baby. The staff referred to her carefully, as though naming her might make things permanent. Daniel said nothing, but names have a way of demanding themselves. One morning, as Daniel sat by the window with her asleep against his chest, the sun caught her face, just right. Her lashes fluttered, her lips parted slightly, as though she was about to speak a secret she hadn't learned yet. Something tightened in his throat. "You look like her," he whispered before he could stop himself. The word startled him. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, not as she was at the end, quiet and fragile, but as she had been before. Curious eyes, soft stubbornness, the way she used to fall asleep holding his finger, afraid to let go. Daniel closed his eyes. "I won't replace you," he said quietly, as if speaking to the air. "I know that." The baby shifted and made a small sound, pressing closer. He felt it then. The truth he had been avoiding. This wasn't replacement. This was continuation. Later that day, the social worker arrived with questions and paperwork. Routine procedures. Temporary custody. Investigations. The possibility that someone might come forward. Daniel listened politely, nodding at the right moments. "What would you like us to call her for now?" the woman asked gently. Daniel hesitated. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Leah," he said finally. The name left his mouth softly, like something fragile. It had been his wife's name. The nanny glanced up, surprised, but said nothing. "Leah!" The baby blinked, then smiled. It was small, barely there, but it felt like a blade and a bomb all at once. That night, Daniel wheeled himself into the nursery, long after everyone else had gone to bed. He held Leah and spoke to her in a low voice, telling her things he hadn't told anyone since the accident. "I don't know how long you'll be here," he said, "but while you are, you're safe." Leah wrapped her fingers around his again. Outside, the mansion remained quiet. Inside that room, something irreversible had happened. Daniel Okoye had given the child a name, and in doing so, he had given himself something he hadn't allowed since the cemetery, a future he hadn't planned to survive for. The first person to notice the change was the driver. Daniel no longer stayed inside all day. He asked to be taken into the garden in the mornings. Sometimes Leah rested in his arms, sometimes in a stroller pushed beside him, but always close enough that he could reach her hand without looking. Then the staff noticed. Meals were adjusted. The nursery light stayed on longer. A quiet order went out that no one was to move Leah without informing Daniel first. The house, once ruled by silence and grief, began to move around the rhythm of a child. And then, inevitably, the outside world noticed too. A family friend came by unannounced one afternoon. He stopped short when he saw Daniel in the living room, Leah sleeping peacefully against his chest. "Daniel," the man said carefully, "I heard rumors. I didn't believe them." Daniel didn't look up. "Now you see." Concern followed quickly behind the surprise. "She's not yours," the man said gently. "You're not thinking clearly. You're still grieving." That word, still, cut deep, as if grief had an expiration date, as if love required permission. More visitors came, some out of worry, some out of curiosity, some with thinly veiled judgment disguised as advice. "A disabled man raising a child alone? People will talk. You should focus on your recovery." What if the real parents come back? Daniel listened without responding. That night, he wheeled himself into the study and sat alone in the dark. Leah slept in the nursery down the hall. Her soft breathing carried faintly through the silence. For the first time since the accident, Daniel felt fear, not of being alone, but of losing someone again. He returned to the nursery and watched Leah sleep, her chest rising and falling steadily. He noticed how calm he felt just being there, how the constant tightness in his chest eased when she was near. "You didn't ask to be found," he whispered. "But neither did I." The next morning, the social worker returned. "There's pressure," she admitted carefully. "Some people feel you're not in the right condition to care for a child." Daniel looked at her steadily. "And what do you feel?" She hesitated. "I see a man who shows up every time." Daniel nodded once. "Then that's enough." He signed the papers requesting extended guardianship. The pen shook slightly in his hand, not from doubt, from the weight of the choice. That evening, Daniel took Leah back to the cemetery. He rolled himself between the two graves and held her close as the wind brushed against them. "I didn't go looking for her," he said softly. "But she found me anyway." Leah stirred and reached up, touching his cheek. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time, the cemetery didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning he had been too broken to imagine. The doctor was the first to say it out loud. Daniel had gone in for what was supposed to be a routine checkup. Blood pressure, muscle assessment, the usual questions that never changed. He expected the same tired look of sympathy, the same careful language. Instead, the doctor frowned at the chart. "Your readings are better," he said slowly. "Your blood pressure is down. Your sleep pattern has improved." Daniel shrugged. "I haven't done anything different." The doctor looked up. "Are you sure?" Daniel thought of Leah, of the nights he no longer lay awake until morning, of the way he woke up earlier now, listening for her sounds, of how his days were no longer swallowed by silence. "I'm caring for a baby," he said. The doctor nodded as if that explained everything. Purpose can do what medicine cannot. He replied, "We don't talk about it enough." Daniel rolled out of the clinic with those words echoing in his mind. Purpose. At home, the changes were small, but undeniable. His hands felt steadier when he lifted Leah. His shoulders no longer slumped forward as much. He caught himself sitting straighter, especially when she watched him with those wide, attentive eyes. One afternoon, while holding her near the window, Leah kicked suddenly, hard enough that Daniel laughed out loud before he could stop himself. The sound startled them both. Leah stared at him, then broke into a delighted squeal. Daniel froze. It had been so long since he'd heard his own laughter that it felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. His throat tightened, but this time the tears that followed were not only grief, they were relief. That night, Daniel wheeled himself to the mirror in the bathroom. He studied his reflection, the uneven beard, the tired eyes, the face of a man who had survived too much. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel picked up the razor. This time, he didn't stop halfway. He shaved everything away. Not to look younger, not to forget, but to see himself clearly again. When he finished, he barely recognized the man staring back at him. But he didn't look broken. He looked present. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. The staff noticed immediately. "You look better, sir," the housekeeper said carefully. Daniel nodded. "I feel different." Later, the nanny approached him, hesitant. "She doesn't cry as much anymore," she said. "She sleeps best after you hold her." Daniel looked down at Leah, who was busy gripping his thumb with both hands, as if it were the most important thing in the world. "Maybe," he said quietly. "We're helping each other." That night, Daniel sat in the nursery long after Leah had fallen asleep. He rested his hand lightly on the crib rail, feeling the calm in his chest settle deeper than it had in months. For the first time since the accident, Daniel Okoye allowed himself to think a dangerous thought. What if surviving had not been a mistake? What if the road that took everything from him had also led him here? And what if this small life, found beside a trash can, was not a burden, but a reason? The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Plain envelope, official seal. Daniel recognized it instantly. He read it once, then again, slowly. A formal notice from child welfare authorities. Someone had filed a concern, an anonymous report questioning his capacity, his disability, his emotional stability, his fitness to raise a child. Daniel lowered the paper onto his desk. So the whispers had found a voice. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Evaluations, interviews, home assessments, the possibility, spoken politely but clearly, that Leah could be removed. For the first time since the accident, fear returned sharp and immediate. Not fear for himself, fear of losing her. That night, Daniel sat in the nursery, long after Leah had fallen asleep. He watched her chest rise and fall, counting each breath as though memorizing them. "I didn't steal you," he whispered. "I didn't choose this to heal myself. You chose me too." Leah shifted in her sleep, her tiny hand curling into a fist before relaxing again. The next days were heavy. Lawyers visited. Doctors wrote reports. Friends who had once cautioned him now offered guarded support. Others stayed silent. Daniel noticed who showed up and who didn't. When the caseworker arrived for the home visit, Daniel met her calmly. She looked around the nursery. The clean bottles, the neatly folded clothes, the chair positioned perfectly beside the crib for his wheelchair. "You're aware this won't be easy," she said. Daniel nodded. "Nothing worth keeping ever is." She watched him closely. "Why do you want her?" The question landed hard. Daniel didn't answer immediately. "Because," he said finally. "She was left behind. And so was I." The evaluation continued for hours. Questions about finances, about his disability, about contingency plans, about what would happen if his health declined. Daniel answered all of them. But the moment that stayed with him came later, when Leah began to cry. The nanny moved to pick her up, but the caseworker raised a hand. "Let's see what happens," she said quietly. Daniel rolled forward without hesitation. The moment Leah was in his arms, the crying stopped. She reached up, fingers wrapping around his hand like she always did. Calm returned instantly. The room fell silent. The caseworker's expression softened. Not professionally, but humanly. She wrote something down, then closed her notebook. "I think," she said slowly, "this child already knows where she belongs." After she left, Daniel wheeled himself into the garden, Leah asleep against his chest. The sky was wide and blue, indifferent to paperwork and judgment. For the first time, Daniel realized something. Grief had taught him how to endure pain, but Leah was teaching him how to fight. And this time, he wasn't fighting loss. He was fighting for love. Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat by the window with Leah against his chest, watching the city lights blink on and off in the distance. For years, those lights had meant power, meetings, deals, deadlines. Now they meant nothing. Only the weight of the child in his arms mattered. He thought of the words people had used in hushed tones. Risk, unstable, unwise. They spoke as if love were a gamble. Daniel pressed his cheek lightly against Leah's head. She smelled of milk and clean sheets. Simple, ordinary things that felt more precious than any fortune he had ever built. "I don't know how to be perfect," he whispered. "But I know how to stay." Leah stirred, her fingers tightening in his shirt. The following days moved quickly. Legal meetings, more assessments, conversations filled with careful language and hidden doubt. One lawyer advised caution. "Daniel, you have everything to lose," he said. "Your health, your reputation." Daniel cut him off. "I already lost everything." He replied calmly. "This is what I found." The words surprised even him. The final hearing was quiet. No press, no spectacle. Just a small room, a few officials, and a man in a wheelchair holding a baby who watched the world with curious eyes. When Daniel was asked if he understood the responsibility he was taking on, he didn't hesitate. "I do," he said. "I also understand the responsibility of walking away, and I won't do that again." Silence followed, then a nod. Temporary guardianship became permanent intent. Daniel wheeled out of the building into open sunlight, his chest tight. Not with fear, but with relief so sharp it almost hurt. That evening he returned to the cemetery one last time. He held Leah close against his chest as he rolled between the two graves, her small weight warm and solid in his arms. He spoke softly, his voice steady. "I didn't replace you," he said, "but I learned how to live again." The wind moved gently through the trees, not answering, but not accusing either. When he left, he didn't look back, not because it no longer hurt, but because he no longer needed to ask the past for permission. At home, Daniel made changes. He adjusted his schedule, modified rooms, cleared space not just in the house, but in himself. He allowed help, accepted support, let the world back in slowly, on his own terms. That night, as Leah slept in her crib, Daniel sat beside her and realized something simple and terrifying. This was no longer a chapter of survival. It was a commitment, and for the first time since the accident, Daniel Okoye did not feel afraid of tomorrow. He felt ready. Time did not rush. It arrived quietly, one ordinary day at a time. Leah learned to crawl on the wide floors of the mansion, her laughter echoing where silence once lived. She took her first steps by gripping the edge of Daniel's wheelchair, steadying herself as he steadied her right back. When she fell, she didn't cry immediately. She looked to him first, as if checking whether the world was still safe. Daniel always nodded. "It's okay," he would say. "Try again." And she did. Mornings changed. Daniel woke early now, not from nightmares, but from small sounds, soft footsteps, whispered giggles, the rustle of curiosity moving through the house. He began attending therapy more consistently, not because he believed it would fix him, but because Leah watched him try. He noticed the difference in his body first. He could sit upright longer. His arms felt stronger from lifting her, holding her, pushing her stroller through the garden paths. The doctors called it improvement. Daniel called it motivation. The world adjusted too. Some people still stared. Some still whispered. A disabled billionaire raising a child alone. It made people uncomfortable. Daniel no longer cared. He had stopped trying to explain his life to those who had never saved him. Leah grew curious about everything. She asked questions without fear. "Why do you sit?" she asked one afternoon, touching the wheels of his chair. "Because my legs don't work the way they used to," Daniel replied. She considered this for a moment, then smiled. "Your hands work." "Yes," he said, surprised. "They do." "Good," she said. "You can still hold me." That night, Daniel sat awake long after Leah had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling with a quiet ache in his chest. Not pain. Gratitude. On Leah's 5th birthday, they returned to the cemetery together. Daniel rolled between the graves, Leah walking beside him now, her small hand resting on his knee. She didn't fully understand the place yet, but she sensed its importance. "These are the people I loved before you," Daniel told her softly. Leah nodded, serious. Then she placed a small flower between the stones. "For them," she said. Daniel closed his eyes. The man who had once begged the graves for answers now stood, still seated, still scarred, but no longer empty. He had not been healed. He had been rebuilt. And as Leah laughed and ran back toward the car, Daniel Okoye understood something he had never known before. Love does not erase loss. It teaches you how to carry it without breaking. The attention came quietly at first. A photo. A short article. A mention buried deep in a business column that wasn't supposed to be about family at all. Reclusive billionaire Daniel Okoye appears publicly for the first time in years, with a young girl by his side. Daniel hadn't planned it. He had attended a small charity event focused on abandoned children, something he had funded privately for years but never spoken about. Leah walked beside him, her hand resting naturally on his knee, as the wheelchair rolled forward. She wore a simple dress and a smile that did not know fear. Someone recognized him. Someone else recognized the child. Questions followed. "Is she yours? Is this adoption official? How does a disabled man raise a child alone?" Daniel answered none of them. But Leah did. She looked up at him, then back at the woman holding the microphone. "He's my daddy," she said clearly. "He found me." The room went silent. Not the uncomfortable silence Daniel once knew, but a stunned, listening one. A week later, the story spread. Not because Daniel was rich, not because he was disabled, but because the details refused to be ignored. A man who lost everything, a baby left beside a trash can, a choice that changed 2 lives. Some praised him, some criticized him. The internet did what it always did, dividing, judging, speculating. Daniel read none of it. Instead, he focused on what came next. He expanded the foundation quietly, built safe homes, funded trauma care, created programs not just for abandoned children, but for parents who felt broken beyond repair. At a private board meeting months later, someone asked him the question that had begun to follow him everywhere. "Who saved who?" the man asked. Daniel looked at the empty seat beside him, the one Leah usually occupied when she finished school early. He smiled. "I thought I saved her," he said slowly. "But I was wrong. The room waited. She saved me first." That evening, Daniel wheeled himself into Leah's room and sat beside her bed as she slept. Her breathing was steady, her face peaceful. "You'll grow up," he whispered. "You'll choose your own life. You won't always need me." Leah shifted and murmured something unintelligible, then reached out and caught his finger in her sleep. Daniel closed his eyes. "And I'll still be here," he said softly. "Because once someone saves you, you don't forget how." Outside, the city moved on. Inside that room, the truth settled quietly. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with a promise kept, every single day. Years later, people would ask Daniel Okoye when his life truly changed. Some expected him to say the accident. Others assumed it was the day he became disabled. A few believed it was when he rebuilt his empire after disappearing from the world. Daniel always gave the same answer. "It was the day I stopped the car." By then, Leah was no longer the baby found beside a trash can. She was a young woman with steady eyes and a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had been chosen. She moved through the world with compassion, not entitlement. She listened more than she spoke. And when she smiled, it carried the kind of warmth that made people feel seen. She never forgot where she came from. On her graduation day, Leah wheeled Daniel through the crowd herself, refusing help from anyone else. She wanted it that way. When her name was called, she didn't look for the loudest applause. She looked for him. Daniel raised his hand. That was enough. Later that evening, they sat together in the garden. The same garden where silence once ruled, now alive with light and laughter from friends and family. Daniel had slowly welcomed back into his life. "Do you ever regret it?" Leah asked gently. "Stopping the car?" Daniel smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "I regret the years I spent believing my life was over," he said. "Not the day it began again." Leah nodded, understanding more than most. At a global summit years later, Leah Okoye stood at the podium. Behind her, on the large screen, a single image remained frozen. A man in a wheelchair, a small girl holding his hand. The room was silent. "I'm often asked," Leah began, her voice steady, calm, unmistakably hers. "What inspired me to dedicate my life to children who feel forgotten?" She glanced toward the front row. Daniel sat there, composed, dignified, his eyes never leaving her. "They expect me to talk about success," she continued. "About money, about influence." She smiled slightly. "But my story didn't begin in a boardroom." A pause. "It began on the side of a road, when a man who had already lost everything chose not to drive away." The room leaned in. "My father didn't walk," Leah said. "But he taught me how to move forward. He didn't rescue me from life. He taught me how to live inside it." She took a breath. "And if you ask me who saved who," her eyes found Daniel's, "I don't believe that question matters anymore." Applause filled the hall. But Daniel heard only one thing: purpose, not as a legacy waiting for death, but as something alive, breathing, and standing right in front of him. He had not just survived. He had multiplied himself through love. And so the story ends, not with a miracle, but with a choice. Daniel Okoye never got his old life back. He never walked again. He never stopped missing the 2 graves he once cried beside. But life gave him something else. Not what he lost, but what he needed. A broken man, a discarded child. 2 lives that should have ended in silence. Instead, They became each other's answer. And if you ever wonder why some people survive things that should have destroyed them, remember this. Sometimes you don't survive because you're strong. You survive because someone needs you to. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. And tell us where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to Folk Tales by Olivia. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful.